from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, Manhattan, buzzed with whispers from New York's elite. Crystal champagne glasses clinked, designer gowns brushed against Italian marble, and the aroma of expensive perfumes mixed with the sound of a discreet orchestra. It was the most exclusive charity gala of the year, where millions of dollars would be raised for noble causes, or at least, that's what the golden invitation claimed. Crack. The sound echoed through the ballroom like thunder on a sunny day. All conversation ceased. 200 heads turned simultaneously toward the center of the ballroom, where a woman in a blood-red dress stood with her hand still raised, trembling with rage. In front of her, a man in an impeccable tuxedo held his hand to his face, a red handprint forming on his right cheek. "You arrogant jerk," shouted Elise Harper, her green eyes sparkling with fury. "You think you can buy anything in this world, including people?" Nathan Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Enterprises and one of America's richest men, blinked several times. Still processing what had happened, no one, and he really meant no one, had dared to raise a hand to him in the last 15 years. What the heck?" he muttered, more shocked than irritated. "What the heck is that? You offered me $100,000 to spend the night with you." Elise practically spat the words. "I'm a respected journalist from the New York Tribune, not some gold digger." The crowd's murmur grew. Cell phones began to appear, cameras discreetly pointed at the scene. Nathan realized he was at the center of what would probably be the biggest social scandal of the year. "Listen, there's been a misunderstanding," he began, but was interrupted. "Misunderstanding, my foot." Elise took a step forward, her 5-inch heels making her appear even more imposing. "You came here with your arrogance, your $50 million smile, and thought I'd fall at your feet like all the others." Nathan opened his mouth to respond, but then something caught Elise's attention. Her eyes widened, and all color drained from her face. "No," she whispered, walking toward them, with a malicious smile on his face and an artificial blonde glued to his arm, was Colin Ramsey, her ex-fiancé, the man who had betrayed her 3 months earlier with her best friend, destroying not only her heart, but also her reputation in the journalism world. Well, if it isn't little Elise Harper," Colin said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "I see you finally found your level. Playing with the big boys suits you." The blonde beside him laughed like a hyena, and Elise felt the world spinning around her. All the cameras were now pointed at her, capturing each second of her humiliation. That's when it happened. Nathan Caldwell, still with the slap mark on his face, took a step beside Elise. Without warning, he pulled her to him, one hand firm on her waist, the other gently lifting her chin. "Sorry, darling," he murmured, his blue eyes meeting hers. "I should have done this a long time ago." And then he kissed her. It wasn't a shy or hesitant kiss. It was a movie kiss, the kind that makes time stop, fireworks explode, and the whole world disappear. Elise felt her knees weaken, her hands automatically gripping the lapels of his tuxedo. When they separated, the ballroom was in complete silence. Colin had paled, his mouth open in shock. The blonde beside him looked like she had swallowed a fish. Nathan kept Elise close to him, his lips curving into a genuine smile. "The first in years." "Now," he said, his voice carrying throughout the ballroom, "did someone say something about my fiancé?" Elise looked at him, her eyes still glazed from the kiss, and whispered, "You're completely crazy." "Completely," he agreed, kissing her forehead. "But admit it, it worked." And for the first time in 3 months, Elise Harper smiled genuinely. What she didn't know was that that kiss had changed not only her night but her entire life. The elevator doors closed with a soft ding, finally providing refuge from the chaos they'd left behind in the Plaza ballroom. Elise pressed her back against the mirrored wall, her chest rising and falling rapidly as the adrenaline began to wear off. "Okay, so," she started, then stopped, running her hands through her auburn hair. "What exactly just happened back there?" Nathan loosened his bow tie, the first genuine laugh he'd had in months escaping his lips. "Well, let's see. You slapped me, called me an arrogant jerk. I kissed you senseless. And now, apparently, we're engaged. This is insane." Elise spun around to face him. "Do you have any idea what you've done? By tomorrow morning, this will be on every gossip website, every newspaper, every stock market report." Nathan finished calmly, "Trust me, I know exactly what I've done." The elevator opened on the parking garage level, and Nathan gestured for her to follow him. "Come on. We need to talk somewhere private. The paparazzi will be swarming the lobby in about 10 minutes. I can't just leave with you. I don't even know you." But even as she protested, Elise found herself following him toward a sleek black Tesla. Nathan Caldwell, 32, CEO of Caldwell Enterprises, graduated from Harvard Business School, allergic to shellfish, and apparently excellent at impromptu fake engagements. He opened the passenger door for her. "There, now you know me." Despite everything, Elise felt a smile tugging at her lips. "That's not exactly a comprehensive background check. We'll have plenty of time for that." Nathan waited patiently by the open door. "Look, I know this is crazy, but that guy, Colin, he was about to destroy you in front of 200 people and a dozen cameras. I couldn't just stand there and watch." The mention of Colin's name made Elise's stomach twist. She remembered the humiliation in his voice, the way he'd looked at her like she was dirt on his shoe. Without another word, she got into the car. As Nathan drove through Manhattan traffic, Elise stared out the window, processing the evening's events. "So, what's your angle?" she asked suddenly. "My angle? Nobody does something like that without a reason. What do you get out of this fake engagement?" Nathan was quiet for a moment, navigating around a taxi. "You really want to know? I'm a journalist. I always want to know. My grandmother." He glanced at her briefly. Margaret Caldwell, 87 years old, founder of Caldwell Enterprises, and the most stubborn woman on the East Coast. She's been on my case about settling down for the past 5 years. Last month, she threatened to leave the company to my cousin Ethan if I don't produce a serious relationship by Christmas. And Ethan is an incompetent playboy who would run the company into the ground within 6 months. Nathan pulled into the parking garage of a luxury apartment building. "My grandmother built this empire from nothing. I can't let it be destroyed because I'm apparently emotionally unavailable and married to my work." Elise studied his profile in the dim garage lighting. There was something vulnerable in his expression that hadn't been there at the gala. "So, you need a fake fiancé, and you need to show your ex that you've moved on to bigger and better things." Nathan turned off the engine and looked at her directly. "It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. This is completely nuts. The best plans usually are." They took the elevator to the 42nd floor, and when Nathan opened the door to his penthouse, Elise's breath caught. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of Central Park, and the apartment was decorated with understated elegance that screamed expensive taste. "Nice place," she said, trying to sound unimpressed. "Thanks. My decorator has excellent taste in overpriced furniture." Nathan headed to the kitchen. "Coffee? Wine? Something stronger?" "I feel like this conversation requires caffeine or alcohol." "Coffee's fine." Elise wandered to the windows, looking out at the twinkling city lights. "So, how exactly would this work? This fake engagement, we'd need to make it believable." Nathan started the espresso machine. "Public appearances, social media posts. Maybe you could move in here for a while." "Whoa. Hold on." Elise spun around. "Move in? I barely know you." "Separate bedrooms, obviously." Nathan held up his hands. "This place has 4 bedrooms. You'd have complete privacy." "And how long would this charade last?" 6 months, maybe 8. Long enough for my grandmother to believe it's serious. Long enough for the media attention to help your career recover from whatever Colin did to damage it." Elise was quiet, considering the truth was Colin's betrayal had done more than break her heart. He'd spread rumors about her ethics as a journalist, questioned her sources, made her editors doubt her credibility. The scandal tonight, if spun correctly, could actually rehabilitate her image. "I'd want a contract," she said finally. "Of course, with specific terms, boundaries, exit clauses." "Absolutely. And I keep my apartment. This would just be for appearances. Whatever makes you comfortable." Nathan handed her a perfect cappuccino, their fingers brushing as she took the cup. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her, and from the way Nathan's eyes widened slightly, she knew he'd felt it too. "There's one more thing," she said, taking a sip of coffee to steady herself. "What's that? That kiss?" "It can't happen again." Nathan studied her face for a long moment. "Because you didn't like it?" Elise felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Because I liked it too much." A slow smile spread across Nathan's face. "This is going to be interesting. This is going to be complicated. The best things usually are." Outside the penthouse windows, New York City sparkled like a promise of adventure. Neither of them knew that their fake engagement was about to become the most real thing either had ever experienced. The next morning arrived with the subtlety of a freight train. Elise's phone had been buzzing nonstop since 6 a.m., and when she finally looked at the screen, she had 47 missed calls, 93 text messages, and approximately 200 social media notifications. "Oh my gosh," she muttered, scrolling through the headlines on her phone. "Caldwell's mystery fiancé. Who is Elise Harper? From slap to kiss." The Plaza Gala's most shocking moment. Billionaire's surprise engagement rocks Wall Street. Her apartment buzzer rang insistently. Through the intercom, she heard her best friend Lila's voice. "Elise Marie Harper, you open this door right now, or I'm calling the fire department." 5 minutes later, Lila Wynn burst through the door like a tiny tornado, her designer handbag swinging dangerously as she waved a stack of newspapers. "What the heck?" Lila slammed the papers on Elise's coffee table. "You get engaged to Nathan Caldwell and don't tell your best friend?" "I had to find out from page 6. "Lila, I can explain." "You better explain. Do you know who this man is?" "He's only been on Forbes's most eligible bachelor list for the past 3 years. His net worth has more zeros than my phone number." Elise's phone rang. Nathan's name appeared on the screen. "That's him," she said weakly. "Answer it." Lila practically shrieked. "Put it on speaker." "Hello, Nathan." "Good morning, darling." His voice was warm with amusement. "I take it you've seen the news. Hard to miss when there are photographers camping outside my building." "Ah, yes, I may have underestimated the media interest. My assistant is handling the press releases, but we need to meet today to finalize our arrangement." Lila's eyes were practically bulging out of her head. She grabbed a notepad and scribbled, "Ask about the kiss." Elise swatted the notepad away. "Where did you want to meet?" "My lawyer's office. We'll need to make this official if we're going to pull it off." "Can you be at Bennett, Black & Associates at 11? "I'll be there." "Oh, and Elise, you might want to use the service entrance. The front of the building looks like a media circus." After hanging up, Elise turned to face Lila's expectant stare. "Spill everything." 2 hours later, Elise sat in the most intimidating conference room she'd ever seen, across from Nathan and a lawyer who looked like he charged more per hour than she made in a month. "The terms are quite straightforward," said Thomas Bennett, sliding a thick document across the mahogany table, "a 6-month engagement with an option to extend if mutually agreed upon. Ms. Harper will receive a monthly stipend of $50,000. $50,000? Elise nearly choked on her coffee. "That's ridiculous. I don't need. You'll need new clothes, accessories, and the ability to attend events without worrying about your regular job." Nathan interrupted smoothly. "Consider it a performance fee." The lawyer continued. "Joint public appearances, a minimum of twice per week. Separate living arrangements, though Ms. Harper will have access to Mr. Caldwell's penthouse for appearances. No romantic involvement with third parties during the contract period." "What about actual romantic involvement with each other?" Elise asked, then immediately regretted it when Nathan raised an eyebrow. "That's not covered in the contract," the lawyer said diplomatically. "It should be," Elise said firmly. "No romantic involvement. Period. This is business." Nathan looked amused. "If that's what you want, it's fine. But what about physical contact for appearances? Hand-holding? Kissing at events?" Elise felt her cheeks warm. "Minimal physical contact, and absolutely no more surprise kisses. Even if your ex shows up again? Especially if my ex shows up again." The lawyer was frantically typing notes. "Perhaps we should define minimal physical contact. More specifically." Just then, the conference room door burst open. A tiny elderly woman with silver hair, dressed in a Chanel suit that probably cost more than Elise's car, marched in with the authority of someone accustomed to owning every room she entered. "Nathan Alexander Caldwell. What is this nonsense I'm reading in the papers?" Nathan stood immediately, his entire demeanor shifting. "Grandmother, I'd like you to meet. I know exactly who she is." Margaret Caldwell's sharp blue eyes, so similar to Nathan's, fixed on Elise. "The question is, what are her intentions toward my grandson?" Elise stood as well, extending her hand. "Miss Caldwell, it's a pleasure to." "It's Ms. Caldwell. I never took my husband's name." Margaret's handshake was firm, her gaze assessing. "I built this company when women weren't even allowed in boardrooms. I don't need a man's name to define me." "I respect that," Elise said genuinely. "I've read about your career. What you accomplished in the 70 seconds and 80 seconds was remarkable." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "You've done your research." "I'm a journalist. Research is what I do." "Good. I hate people who speak from ignorance." Margaret turned to Nathan. "Is this real, or another one of your schemes to get me off your back about marriage?" The room fell silent. Nathan and Elise exchanged glances. "It's real," Grandmother, Nathan said quietly. Margaret studied them both. Then I suppose you won't mind joining me for dinner Sunday. Both of you, at the estate. It wasn't a question. Of course. Elise heard herself saying, we'd love to. After Margaret left with the force of a departing hurricane, Elise sank back into her chair. Your grandmother is terrifying. She's also incredibly smart. If anyone can see through this, it's her. Then we better make it convincing. Nathan leaned back in his chair, studying her. You know, for someone who insisted on no romantic involvement, you're awfully good at playing the devoted fiancé. I'm a good actress when I need to be. Is that what this is? Acting? Elise met his gaze directly. What else would it be? Nathan smiled, but something in his eyes suggested the question was more complicated than either of them wanted to admit. I guess we'll find out. As they signed the contract, neither of them noticed the small clause on page 12 that Thomas Bennett had quietly added. This agreement may be terminated early by mutual consent or by genuine romantic attachment between the parties. Some lawyers, it seemed, were hopeless romantics. The Caldwell estate sprawled across 20 acres of prime Hampton's real estate, like something out of a Gatsby novel. As Nathan's Tesla wound up the circular driveway, Elise pressed her face to the window, taking in the manicured gardens, the fountain that probably cost more than her annual salary, and the mansion that seemed to go on forever. You grew up here? She asked, trying to keep the awe out of her voice. Unfortunately, Nathan replied, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Every summer, every holiday, every weekend. My parents thought I needed character building. What's wrong with character building? Nothing. When it doesn't involve being thrown into a pool at 5 a.m., because Caldwells don't sleep past sunrise, or having to recite quarterly profit reports over breakfast when you're 8 years old. Elise studied his profile, seeing tension in the set of his jaw. Your grandmother raised you. After my parents died in a car accident when I was 12, yes. Margaret became my guardian, my mentor, and my biggest critic, all rolled into one terrifying package. The vulnerability in his voice caught her off guard. In the few days since their arrangement began, she'd seen the confident CEO, the charming public figure, even the frustrated grandson, but this was the first glimpse of the boy who'd lost his parents and been thrust into a world of impossible expectations. Nathan, I'm sorry. I didn't know. It's fine, he said quickly, parking in front of the massive oak doors. Ancient history. Besides, she did prepare me to run the company. I just wish the cost hadn't been quite so high. Before Elise could respond, the front doors opened, and a butler, who could have been cast in Downton Abbey, appeared. Master Nathan, welcome home. Ms. Caldwell is waiting in the rose garden. Thank you, Winston. How's she been this week? Winston's expression remained perfectly neutral, but Elise caught the slight twitch of his eyebrow. Energetic seer. She's fired 3 gardeners and reorganized the entire wine cellar again. Nathan groaned. She's nervous. That's never good. They walked through the mansion, and Elise tried not to gawk at the oil paintings that were probably worth more than most people's houses, the crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow prisms across marble floors, and the antique furniture that belonged in a museum. Relax, Nathan murmured, offering her his arm as they approached the rose garden. You look like you're about to face a firing squad. Aren't I? Probably. That's not reassuring. I'm not good at reassuring. I'm better at honest. The rose garden was a masterpiece of landscape architecture, with hundreds of roses in every color imaginable, creating a living tapestry around a central gazebo. Margaret Caldwell sat at an elegant wrought-iron table, dressed in a lavender silk dress that probably cost more than Elise's rent, with her silver hair perfectly coiffed and her posture ramrod straight. You're 3 minutes late, she said without looking up from her newspaper. Traffic, Nathan replied, pulling out Elise's chair before taking his own. There's no traffic on a private road, Nathan. Margaret folded her newspaper with military precision and fixed her sharp gaze on Elise. You look nervous, dear. A little, Elise admitted. I want to make a good impression. Good. I despise people who don't care what others think. It shows a lack of respect. Margaret poured tea from an ornate silver service. Now, tell me about yourself. And don't give me the sanitized version you'd give a reporter. I want the real story. Elise accepted the delicate china cup, acutely aware that she was probably holding something worth more than her car. What would you like to know? Everything. Start with your childhood. For the next hour, Margaret grilled Elise with the precision of a seasoned investigator. She wanted to know about Elise's middle-class upbringing in Ohio, her journalism degree from Northwestern, her career at the Tribune, her favorite books, her political views, her thoughts on modern art, and her opinion on the current state of investigative journalism. Through it all, Nathan sat quietly, occasionally refilling teacups or offering encouraging smiles, but mostly just watching the two most important women in his life size each other up. "And this ex-fiancé of yours," Margaret said, cutting into a perfectly prepared salmon, "the one who made such a scene at the plaza. Tell me about him." Elise's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Colin, there's not much to tell. We were together for 2 years, engaged for 6 months. He made some poor choices. He cheated," Margaret said bluntly, "with your best friend, if the gossip columns are accurate." "Grandmother," Nathan warned, "I'm not asking to be cruel, Nathan. I'm asking because I want to understand what kind of man would be foolish enough to lose a woman like Elise." Elise felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Colin thought I was too ambitious, too focused on my career. He wanted someone who would be satisfied being an accessory to his life instead of building her own. And what did you want? I wanted someone who understood that loving someone means supporting their dreams, not trying to shrink them to fit your own insecurities." Margaret's eyes sharpened with interest. "An excellent answer. And what do you want from Nathan?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Elise felt Nathan tense beside her, and she realized this was the moment that would determine whether Margaret saw through their charade. "I want someone who sees me as an equal," Elise said honestly. "Someone who challenges me to be better without trying to change who I am. Someone who isn't threatened by my success because he's secure in his own." "And do you think Nathan is that man?" Elise looked at Nathan, seeing something vulnerable and hopeful in his blue eyes. "I think he has the potential to be." It wasn't a lie. She realized with surprise, over the past few days, she'd seen glimpses of the man beneath the billionaire exterior, the way he'd protected her from Colin's humiliation, the way he'd been careful to respect her boundaries, even while negotiating their arrangement, the way he'd shown genuine concern for her comfort and safety. Margaret nodded approvingly. "Nathan, walk me to the greenhouse. I want to show you the new orchids." Nathan looked confused. "But we haven't finished." "Now, Nathan," it was clearly not a request. Nathan squeezed Elise's hand briefly before following his grandmother across the garden, leaving Elise alone with her thoughts and a growing sense of unease. 20 minutes later, they returned, Margaret looking satisfied and Nathan looking like he'd been through an interrogation. "Well," Margaret announced, settling back into her chair, "I've made my decision." "Your decision?" Elise asked. "About whether I approve of this engagement." Margaret's smile was sharp. "I do, conditionally." "Conditionally?" Nathan repeated. "You'll both stay here for the next 2 weeks. Consider it an extended engagement party. I want to observe how you interact when you think no one is watching." Elise's teacup rattled against its saucer. "Stay here? Together? Separate rooms?" "Naturally. I'm not a complete heathen." Margaret's eyes twinkled with mischief. "But if you're truly engaged, you should be comfortable in each other's company for more than a few hours at a time." "Grandmother, that's not necessary," Nathan began. "It's absolutely necessary. Ethan stopped by yesterday, asking pointed questions about your sudden engagement. He seems to think it's rather convenient timing." The mention of Nathan's cousin made his jaw tighten. "Ethan can think whatever he wants. Ethan can also contest my will if he believes you're deceiving me." Margaret's voice carried a steel edge. 2 weeks, Nathan. Prove to me this is real, and I'll announce my succession plans at the company board meeting. Fail to convince me, and I'll seriously consider Ethan's suitability for leadership." Elise and Nathan exchanged glances. They were trapped, and Margaret knew it. "Fine," Nathan said finally. 2 weeks. "Excellent. Winston will prepare the blue suite for Elise and ensure your usual room is ready." "Nathan." Margaret stood, smoothing her dress. "Dinner is at 7. Dress code is formal, and we'll be joined by the Langleys and the Thorntons. They're dying to meet Nathan's mysterious fiancée." After Margaret glided away with the grace of a queen, Elise and Nathan sat in stunned silence. 2 weeks. Elise finally said. 2 weeks, Nathan agreed. With dinner parties and formal dress codes and constant observation, and Ethan lurking around looking for proof, we're faking. Elise stood up, pacing around the rose bushes. "This is getting complicated." "It was always going to be complicated. Not this complicated. I thought we'd attend a few events, smile for some photos, and be done with it. I didn't sign up for extended family vacations and psychological evaluations." Nathan stood as well, catching her arm gently to stop her pacing. "Hey, we can handle this, can we? Because right now, it feels like we're in way over our heads." "Maybe we are." Nathan stepped closer, his voice dropping to that warm, intimate tone that made her stomach flutter. "But we're in it together." For a moment, they stood there in the rose garden, surrounded by the scent of flowers and the sound of distant ocean waves, and Elise felt the dangerous pull of actually caring about this man. The setting was romantic. His eyes were sincere, and she was remembering exactly why that kiss at the plaza had been so earth-shattering. "Nathan," she started, but was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the garden path. A man who looked like a younger, less refined version of Nathan approached them with a smirk that immediately put Elise on edge. Well, if it isn't the happy couple," he said, his voice dripping with false charm. "Ethan Caldwell. I've been dying to meet the woman who finally tamed my cousin." Nathan's entire body tensed. "Ethan, I didn't know you were coming by today. Margaret invited me for dinner. Said she wanted the whole family to meet Elise." Ethan's smile was predatory. "I have to say, Nathan, your engagement came as quite a surprise. So sudden, so convenient. Love doesn't follow a schedule," Elise said smoothly, slipping her hand into Nathan's. "When you know, you know." "How romantic," Ethan replied, his tone suggesting he found it anything but. "And how long have you two been seeing each other before the plaza incident? I mean, it was a trap, and they all knew it. Any answer they gave could be verified, investigated, disproven. Does it matter?" Nathan asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "We're together now. Of course it matters. I'm just curious about the timeline. After all, it's not every day that America's most eligible bachelor gets slapped and then engaged in the same evening." Elise felt Nathan's hand tighten around hers, and she realized he was about to say something that would blow their cover entirely. Acting on instinct, she stepped closer to him, placing her free hand on his chest. "Actually, we've been keeping things private for months," she said, looking up at Nathan with what she hoped was convincing adoration. "Nathan wanted to make sure I could handle the media attention before going public. The plaza thing just accelerated our timeline." "How thoughtful of him," Ethan said, not buying a word of it. "And I suppose you have photos together, text messages. Some kind of proof of this secret relationship." "We're not on trial here, Ethan," Nathan said coldly. "Aren't you?" Ethan's smile turned sharp. "Margaret is getting older, Nathan. She's more trusting than she used to be, but I'm not. And if I find out you're running some kind of con to secure your inheritance, that's enough." Nathan stepped forward, and for a moment, Elise thought he might actually hit his cousin. "Gentlemen." Margaret's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She approached from the house, having clearly heard every word. "I believe that's quite enough family bonding for one afternoon. Ethan, you're early for dinner. Nathan, perhaps you could show Elise to her room so she can freshen up." It was a dismissal, and everyone knew it. Ethan gave them one last calculating look before following Margaret back to the house. "Well," Elise said when they were alone, "your cousin seems lovely. Ethan has always been a snake." Nathan ran a hand through his hair. "But he's not wrong. We need to be more careful. If he finds out we're faking this, then we don't let him find out." Elise straightened her shoulders with determination. "We make this so convincing that even he can't poke holes in it." "And how do we do that?" Elise looked at him for a long moment, weighing her options. "We become the couple we're pretending to be in public, in private, everywhere except behind closed doors. We learn each other's habits, share inside jokes, act like people who are genuinely in love. You think you can fake being in love with me for 2 weeks?" The question was casual, but something in his eyes suggested the answer mattered more than it should. "I'm a very good actress when I need to be," she replied. But even as she said it, she wondered if she was trying to convince him or herself. "Then let's put on the performance of our lives." As they walked back to the house hand in hand for the benefit of any watching eyes, neither of them acknowledged the growing suspicion that the line between performance and reality was becoming dangerously blurred. The next 2 weeks, Elise realized, were going to test more than just their acting abilities. They were going to test every carefully constructed wall she'd built around her heart. And she was terrified that Nathan Caldwell might be the one man capable of tearing them all down. The blue suite was approximately 3 times the size of Elise's Manhattan apartment, complete with a sitting area, a marble bathroom that belonged in a luxury spa, and a 4-poster bed that could comfortably sleep 4 people. As Winston finished placing her hastily packed bags in the walk-in closet, Elise stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the sun set over the Atlantic Ocean. "Will there be anything else, Miss Harper?" Winston asked with the kind of polished professionalism that comes from decades of service to the extremely wealthy. "Actually, yes. How long have you worked for the Caldwell family?" Winston's expression softened slightly. 37 years, miss. I started as a footman when Master Nathan's father was still alive. What was Nathan like as a child?" The butler was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "Curious, brilliant, lonely, I think. Especially after the accident, he used to spend hours in the library, reading everything he could get his hands on. Miss Margaret thought education was the cure for grief. And was it? Master Nathan learned to hide his emotions very well. Whether that's the same as healing? Winston shrugged diplomatically. Perhaps you'll be the judge of that, miss. After Winston left, Elise unpacked her few belongings, feeling increasingly out of place among the silk wallpaper and antique furniture. She'd brought jeans and casual dresses, completely unprepared for a 2-week stay at what was essentially a palace. A soft knock on the adjoining door made her freeze. She'd noticed the door earlier but assumed it led to a bathroom or closet. Elise, it's Nathan. Can I come in? She opened the door to find him standing in what was clearly his childhood bedroom, though it had been updated with adult furnishings. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and she could see diplomas and awards displayed with museum-like precision. Connecting rooms, she raised an eyebrow. Margaret's idea of subtlety, he replied with a wry smile. Don't worry. The door locks from both sides. I just wanted to check if you're okay with all this. Define okay. Nathan leaned against the doorframe, and Elise couldn't help but notice how different he looked in casual clothes. The jeans and navy sweater made him seem younger, more approachable, less like the intimidating CEO, and more like the boy Winston had described. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about Ethan. He's always been jealous of my position in the family, but I didn't expect him to be quite so aggressive. It's fine. I've dealt with hostile sources before. Elise sat on the edge of the enormous bed. But we need to talk about our story. He's going to keep testing us, and we need to have consistent answers. Agreed. Want to grab some coffee and figure this out? There's a study down the hall that's more private. 20 minutes later, they were settled in a cozy study with notebooks, coffee, and what felt suspiciously like homework. Nathan had started a fire in the fireplace, and the whole scene felt so domestic that Elise had to remind herself this was all pretend. Okay, she said, pen poised over paper. How did we meet? Coffee shop. Nathan suggested. Too cliché. Besides, I don't drink coffee shop coffee. I'm a snob about my caffeine. Good to know. Bookstore? Better. Which one? The Strand. You were in the journalism section. I was in business. You dropped a book. I picked it up. We started talking about media ethics in the digital age. Elisa finished. That's believable. I actually do spend a lot of time there. Perfect. When was this? 8 months ago. October 15th. That gives us time to have developed a real relationship before going public. For the next 2 hours, they crafted their fictional love story with the attention to detail of screenwriters. Their first date was dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Little Italy. Nathan had been nervous and spilled wine on his shirt. Elise had laughed and offered to take him to her dry cleaner. Their first kiss was 3 weeks later on the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset because Nathan had wanted to show her the view of Manhattan from his favorite spot. This is actually kind of fun, Elise admitted. Looking at their timeline, we should write romance novels. I don't think billionaire CEOs are allowed to write romance novels. It's probably against some masculine code. Says who? Says my business school professors, my board of directors, and approximately every business magazine that's ever profiled me. Elise studied his face. Do you ever get tired of it? The expectations, the image management, the constant performance. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Every single day. But it's the price of success, right? You become what people need you to be, not what you want to be. And what do you want to be? Honestly, I have no idea anymore. I've been Nathan Caldwell, CEO, for so long that I'm not sure who I am underneath all that. The vulnerability in his voice made Elisa's chest tighten. Well, for what it's worth, I like the version of you I've seen this week, the one who protects people from humiliation and makes terrible jokes about his furniture. You think my jokes are terrible? Objectively awful, but in an endearing way. Nathan laughed, and the sound was so genuine, so different from his polished public persona, that Elise felt something dangerous flutter in her chest. We should probably get some sleep, she said, standing up quickly. Big day tomorrow. Pretending to be madly in love. Right. Pretending. Something in his tone made her look back at him, but his expression was unreadable. The next morning, Elise woke to the smell of bacon and coffee wafting up from the kitchen. She'd slept better than she had in months, possibly because the bed was like sleeping on a cloud, or possibly because she'd felt safer knowing Nathan was in the next room. When she made it downstairs, she found Margaret in the breakfast nook, reading what appeared to be 3 different newspapers simultaneously while making notes in a leather-bound planner. Good morning, dear. I hope you slept well, like a baby. Thank you. This is a beautiful house. It should be. It cost enough. Margaret gestured to the chair across from her. Nathan is out for his morning run. He'll be back in an hour. Coffee? Margaret poured from a silver coffee service, and Elise accepted the cup gratefully. I suppose you're wondering why I really insisted on this 2-week arrangement, Margaret said without preamble. The thought had crossed my mind. Nathan has been alone for too long. Oh, he's had girlfriends, but nothing serious. Nothing that challenged him or made him grow as a person. Margaret's sharp eyes fixed on Elise. He needs someone who won't be intimidated by his success or impressed by his money. And you think I'm that person? I think you slapped him in front of 200 people and didn't apologize. That suggests a certain strength of character. Elise nearly choked on her coffee. You approve of me slapping your grandson? I approve of you treating him like a human being instead of a bank account. Margaret's smile was sharp. Too many people in Nathan's life want something from him: money, connections, reflected glory. You seem to want him to be better than he is. I barely know him. Perhaps. But you see him clearly, which is more than most people manage. Before Elise could respond, Nathan appeared in the doorway, sweaty from his run, and looking altogether too attractive for someone who'd just exercised for an hour. Morning, he said, kissing Elise's cheek in what she assumed was a performance for Margaret. The casual intimacy of it sent an unexpected shock through her system. Morning. Good run? Great. The beach trail is perfect this time of year. He poured himself coffee and sat beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with ocean air. What's the plan for today? Margaret was just telling me about your childhood need for someone to challenge you, Elise said sweetly. Nathan shot his grandmother a look. Was she now? Among other things, Margaret replied innocently. I thought you two might enjoy exploring the grounds today. There's so much history here, and Elise seems like someone who appreciates history. That sounds lovely, Elise agreed. I'd love to hear more about the family legacy. Wonderful. I'll have Cook prepare a picnic lunch. You can eat by the lighthouse. There's a lighthouse? Elise asked. Built in 1892 by Nathan's great-great-grandfather, Margaret said proudly. It's been restored, of course, but it's still functional. Quite romantic, especially at sunset. The word romantic hung in the air with obvious intention. Margaret was clearly orchestrating opportunities for them to bond, and Elise wasn't sure whether to be grateful or terrified. 2 hours later, they were walking along a cliff path that offered stunning views of the Atlantic. Nathan carried a picnic basket that probably contained food worth more than most people's grocery budget, and Elise carried a blanket that felt like it was made of silk. Your grandmother is not subtle, Elise observed. Margaret has never been subtle about anything in her entire life. She probably has a spreadsheet tracking our interactions. Should we be worried about Margaret? Always. But not about this. She likes you. How can you tell? She didn't interrogate you about your family's financial history or your long-term reproductive plans. When she likes someone, she focuses on character instead of credentials. They reached the lighthouse, a beautiful white tower that stood majestically against the blue sky. Nathan spread the blanket on a patch of grass, and they unpacked what turned out to be a gourmet feast. This is incredible, Elise said, biting into what might have been the best sandwich she'd ever tasted. Margaret believes that if you're going to do something, you should do it properly. Nathan opened a bottle of wine that probably cost more than her rent. She had the kitchen staff trained by a Michelin-starred chef. Of course she did. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, watching seagulls dive for fish and feeling the ocean breeze. It was peaceful in a way that Elise hadn't experienced in years of city living. Can I ask you something? Nathan said eventually. Shoot. What's your biggest fear? The question caught her off guard. That's pretty deep for a fake relationship conversation. Maybe. But Ethan is going to keep digging. And the more we know about each other, the more convincing we'll be. It was a reasonable explanation, but something in his eyes suggested the question was more personal than strategic. Becoming irrelevant, she said finally, being forgotten. I've worked so hard to build my career, to make a name for myself in journalism, and Colin almost destroyed that in one night. The idea of disappearing, of not mattering, that terrifies me. Nathan nodded slowly. I get that. Mine's probably the opposite. Never being seen for who I really am. Always being Nathan Caldwell, the CEO, the heir, the public figure. Never just Nathan. Is that why you've never had a serious relationship? Partly. It's hard to trust someone's feelings when you know they're influenced by your bank account. He looked at her directly. You don't seem influenced by my bank account. I find excessive wealth morally complicated, Elise admitted. Not that I'm judging you specifically, but the inequality in this country is staggering. And people with your resources have a responsibility to address that. You're right. His answer surprised her. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Actually, the company does charitable work, but it feels performative, like we're checking boxes instead of making real change. What would real change look like to you? I don't know yet, but I'd like to figure it out. They talked for hours, moving from social responsibility to favorite books, to travel dreams, to childhood embarrassments. Elise found herself sharing stories she hadn't told anyone, and Nathan revealed a sense of humor that was both sharp and self-deprecating. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Nathan stood and offered her his hand. Want to see the view from the lighthouse? The climb up the narrow spiral staircase was dizzying, but the view from the top was breathtaking. The entire coastline stretched out before them, with the Caldwell estate looking like something from a fairy tale below. It's beautiful. Elise breathed. Yeah, it is. When she turned, she found Nathan looking at her instead of the view, and something in his expression made her heart skip. Nathan, I know this is just pretend. He stepped closer anyway, his hand coming up to touch her face gently. But sometimes pretend feels more real than anything else in my life. For a moment, they stood there in the lighthouse as the sun set around them, and Elise felt the dangerous pull of actually falling for this man. The setting was impossibly romantic. His touch was gentle and warm, and the look in his eyes suggested that maybe, just maybe, he was feeling the same confusion she was. We should go back, she whispered, but she didn't move away. We should, he agreed, but his thumb traced her cheekbone softly. They might have stayed there forever, caught in that moment between pretend and real. If Nathan's phone hadn't buzzed with a text message, he stepped back, checking the screen, and his expression darkened immediately. What is it? Ethan. He's invited himself to dinner tonight, and he's bringing a friend. What kind of friend? A private investigator. Elise felt her stomach drop. He's really going to investigate us? Looks like it. Nathan ran a hand through his hair. We need to get back and prepare. If there are any holes in our story, he's going to find them. As they packed up the picnic and walked back toward the house, Elise's mind raced. They'd spent a beautiful day getting to know each other, building a foundation of genuine friendship and attraction, but now reality was crashing back in, reminding her that this was all a performance. A business arrangement that could crumble if they weren't careful. Nathan? Yeah? What happens if Ethan proves we're faking this? Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Then I lose everything. The company, my inheritance, probably my relationship with Margaret, and I go back to being Colin's humiliated ex-fiancé with a damaged reputation. That won't happen. Nathan stopped walking and turned to face her. I won't let it happen. How can you be so sure? Because we're not faking it anymore. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Elise searched his face, looking for signs that he was just talking about their improved acting. But what she saw there was something much more dangerous. Nathan, I know it's complicated. I know this wasn't the plan, but spending today with you, learning who you really are, I can't pretend anymore that this is just business. Elise's heart was racing. We have a contract. We agreed to no romantic involvement. I remember. Nathan stepped closer. But contracts can be renegotiated. Can they? If both parties are willing. Before Elise could respond, they heard voices calling their names from the direction of the house. Ethan had arrived early, and their performance was about to begin. Ready? Nathan offered her his arm. No, she said honestly, but took his arm anyway. But let's do this. As they walked toward the house, Elise realized that the next few hours would determine not just the success of their arrangement, but the future of whatever was growing between them. Ethan's investigation would either expose them as frauds or force them to confront the truth they'd been dancing around all day. She was no longer sure which outcome scared her more. The house loomed ahead of them, lit from within like a stage set, and Elise took a deep breath. Time to give the performance of her life. Even if she was no longer sure where the performance ended and reality began. One more thing, Nathan said quietly as they approached the front door. What? Whatever happens tonight, whatever Ethan finds or doesn't find, I want you to know that today was real. This feeling, this connection, it's real. Elise looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity. For me, too. Good. Hold on to that, because we're about to walk into a war zone. The front door opened, and Margaret appeared with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. There you are, darlings. Ethan is here with his friend. They're very eager to meet you both. Nathan squeezed Elise's hand once, a gesture of support and solidarity, and together they walked into what felt like the most important performance of their lives. Neither of them knew that Ethan's private investigator had already discovered something that would change everything. and it wasn't at all what they expected. The formal dining room at the Caldwell estate had been the setting for countless important dinners over the decades, business deals that shaped Wall Street, political conversations that influenced policy, and social gatherings that determined who was in or out of New York's elite circles. But tonight, as Elise stood before her walk-in closet trying to choose the right armor for battle, she suspected this dinner would be the most consequential of all. She'd been getting ready for over an hour, changing outfits 3 times before settling on a midnight blue dress that Lila had insisted she buy for emergencies, requiring maximum confidence. The silk fabric hugged her curves in all the right places, and the color brought out her eyes. But more importantly, it made her feel powerful. Tonight, she would need every ounce of confidence she could muster. Lila had called earlier, providing moral support via FaceTime while Elise wrestled with her outfit choices. "You're overthinking this," Lila had said, watching Elise hold up different dresses. "Just wear something that makes you feel like you could run a Fortune 500 company or star in your own action movie." "I need to feel like I could survive a professional interrogation by a private investigator," Elise had replied, finally settling on the midnight blue. "Then definitely the blue. It's your power color, plus, it matches your fake fiancé's eyes. His eyes aren't fake, but the engagement is, right?" Elise had ended the call without answering, which was answer enough for Lila, who immediately texted, "Oh my God, you're actually falling for him, aren't you? Call me tomorrow with all the details." Now, as Elise applied a final coat of lipstick, she wondered if Lila's suspicions were written all over her face. The past few days at the estate had blurred every line she'd tried to draw between professional arrangement and personal feelings. Every shared meal, every casual conversation, every moment of genuine laughter had made it harder to remember why she was supposed to keep her guard up. A soft knock on the connecting door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, checking her reflection one last time. Nathan entered, and for a moment, both of them simply stared. He was wearing a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean frame, his dark hair styled with just enough casual messiness to look effortless. The formal wear transformed him from the relaxed man she'd been getting to know into the powerful businessman the world expected to see. But it was the look in his eyes as he took in her appearance that made Elise's breath catch, not the practiced appreciation of someone playing a role, but the stunned recognition of a man seeing the woman he cared about at her most beautiful. "You look," he started, then seemed to lose his words entirely. "Like I can handle whatever Ethan throws at us," she suggested, though her voice came out slightly breathless. "Like the most beautiful woman I've ever seen," he said quietly. And the sincerity in his voice made her heart skip several beats. "Like someone I'd be proud to have beside me, even if this were real." The word real hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them was quite ready to address. "Nathan, I know, wrong time, wrong place." He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect styling. "But I needed you to know before we go down there and face whatever Ethan has planned, that what I said earlier wasn't just stress talking. These past few days, getting to know you, seeing who you really are, beyond the professional facade, it's changed everything for me." Elise felt her carefully constructed walls trembling. "This is complicated. The best things usually are. We have a contract that we wrote when we barely knew each other. When this was just a business arrangement between strangers who'd shared one impulsive moment." Nathan stepped closer, his blue eyes intense. "We're not strangers anymore, Elise." And that moment at the plaza, it wasn't just impulse, was it? Before she could respond, another knock echoed through the room. This time from the main door, Margaret's voice called out with perfect timing. "Children, our guests are arriving. Time to make your entrance." Nathan offered Elise his arm with a wry smile that didn't quite hide the vulnerability in his eyes. "Ready to face the firing squad? With you? I think I can handle anything." The words came out more honest than she'd intended, and from the way Nathan's expression softened, he heard the truth in them. They walked down the grand staircase together, and Elise couldn't help but feel like they were descending into a beautiful trap. The foyer below buzzed with conversation as various members of the Hamptons elite mingled. Champagne glasses catching the light from the crystal chandelier that had probably cost more than most people's annual salaries, the scene looked like something from a movie. All elegant gowns, perfect posture, and the kind of casual wealth that came from generations of careful breeding and investment. But her attention immediately focused on Ethan, who stood near the marble fireplace with a thin, sharp-eyed man in an expensive suit who was definitely not from their usual social circle. The stranger had the look of someone who observed professionally quiet, analytical, memorizing details that others missed. His presence sent a chill down Elise's spine. "Nathan, Elise." Margaret appeared at the bottom of the stairs, resplendent in emerald green silk that complemented her silver hair perfectly. "Come meet our guests. Everyone is simply dying to meet the mysterious woman who captured our Nathan's heart." The next 30 minutes passed in a blur of introductions, small talk, and careful observation. The Langleys and Thorntons were exactly what Elise expected, from Hampton's high society, wealthy, well-educated, and intensely curious about the billionaire's sudden engagement. They asked polite but probing questions about her background, her family, her career, all while maintaining the veneer of social pleasantries that the wealthy had perfected over generations. "So refreshing to meet a woman with her own career," Mrs. Langley commented while discussing Elise's journalism. "Too many young women today seem to think marriage is a retirement plan. I've always believed that the most interesting couples are those where both partners have something valuable to contribute to the conversation." Elise replied diplomatically. "How wonderfully modern of you, dear. And what drew you to journalism?" "The desire to tell stories that matter, to shine light on things that powerful people would prefer to keep in the shadows." She caught Ethan watching this exchange with particular interest, as if cataloging every word for future analysis. Nathan was perfect beside her, playing the role of devoted fiancé with just the right balance of affection and protectiveness. He kept one hand on her lower back, occasionally leaning down to whisper something that made her laugh genuinely, and responded to every inquiry about their relationship with convincing fondness. To any observer, they looked like a couple completely smitten with each other, which was becoming less of a performance and more of a reality with each passing moment. "How did the proposal happen?" Mrs. Thornton asked with the eager curiosity of someone who lived vicariously through other people's romantic moments. Nathan and Elise exchanged glances. They hadn't prepared for this question. "It was spontaneous," Nathan said carefully. "We were walking through Central Park, discussing our future, and I realized I couldn't imagine mine without her in it." "How romantic. Did you get down on one knee?" "Actually," Elise jumped in. "He just stopped walking, took my hands, and asked if I wanted to spend the rest of my life arguing with him about everything from business ethics to the best pizza in Manhattan, and I said yes because someone needs to keep him humble," she added, earning genuine laughter from the group. "That sounds exactly like Nathan," Margaret said with obvious delight. "He's never been one for grand gestures, but his thoughtful moments are worth a dozen roses." But through it all, Elise felt Ethan watching them with calculating eyes, and his companion, introduced simply as Mr. Lin, a family friend, seemed to be cataloging every word, every gesture, every micro-expression with professional interest. Every time she glanced in his direction, she found him studying them with the intensity of a scientist examining specimens under a microscope. "Mr. Lin," she said during a lull in conversation, "what line of work are you in?" "Research and analysis," he replied smoothly. "I help people understand complex situations by examining evidence and drawing conclusions." "That sounds fascinating. What kind of evidence?" "All kinds: financial records, communication patterns, behavioral analysis. Amazing what you can learn about people when you know how to look." The implicit threat in his words was clear. Even wrapped in polite conversation, "Dinner is served," Winston announced with impeccable timing, appearing in the doorway with the kind of perfect posture that came from decades of service to the extremely wealthy. The dining room table could have seated 20 people comfortably, but tonight it was set for 10, with enough crystal, china, and silver to stock a small museum. Margaret had strategically placed Elise and Nathan across from Ethan and Mr. Lin, ensuring maximum observation opportunities during the meal. Every place setting was perfectly arranged, every water glass filled to the precise level, every napkin folded with military precision. The first course passed peacefully enough butternut squash soup that tasted like autumn in a bowl, accompanied by wine that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Conversation flowed around topics safe for mixed company: the recent art exhibition at the Met, the upcoming charity regatta, political developments that affected the financial markets. "I understand you're working on an investigative piece about corporate transparency, Mr. Parency," Langley said to Elise. "Fascinating topic, especially in today's climate." "It is. The challenge is finding sources willing to go on record about questionable practices. Corporate whistleblowing carries significant personal and professional risks, and yet you pursue these stories anyway," Mr. Lin observed. "That suggests either admirable courage or dangerous recklessness. I prefer to think of it as necessary accountability. Elise replied evenly. Democracy requires an informed public, and an informed public requires journalists willing to ask difficult questions, even when those questions might damage innocent people. Good journalism distinguishes between exposing wrongdoing and destroying reputations. The goal is truth, not destruction. Margaret nodded approvingly. Well said. I've always believed that transparency breeds trust, while secrecy breeds suspicion. An interesting philosophy from someone who's built an empire on strategic information management, Ethan commented. There's a difference between privacy and deception, Ethan. One protects legitimate interests, the other conceals questionable behavior. As the main course arrived, perfectly prepared lamb with seasonal vegetables that looked like works of art, Ethan decided to go on the offensive. So, Elise, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, cutting into his lamb with surgical precision. Nathan tells me you two met at a bookstore. The Strand, wasn't it? That's right, Elise replied smoothly, grateful for all those hours they'd spent perfecting their story. I was researching media ethics. He was looking for something on business strategy. We ended up in a very passionate discussion about corporate responsibility in journalism. How wonderfully romantic. Mrs. Langley commented with genuine delight. Love over literature, like something from a novel. What book were you researching specifically? Mr. Lynn asked casually, his voice carrying just a hint of an accent that suggested English wasn't his first language. His fork paused halfway to his mouth, waiting for her answer. Elise felt a flicker of warning. This wasn't casual conversation. Several. Actually, I was working on a piece about the blurred lines between news and entertainment in digital media. Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman was particularly relevant to my research. Excellent choice. Margaret nodded approvingly. Postman was decades ahead of his time. His warnings about entertainment culture undermining serious discourse seem prophetic now. And what business book were you looking for, Nathan? Ethan continued the interrogation, dabbing at his mouth with his napkin. Good to Great by Jim Collins. Nathan answered without hesitation. I was reviewing leadership principles for a board presentation. Interesting, because according to the purchase records we obtained from the Strand, you bought The Art of War that day, not Good to Great. The table fell silent. Even the soft classical music playing in the background seemed to pause. Elise felt her stomach drop as she realized Ethan had actually investigated their fictional meeting. The clink of silver against china stopped. Glasses paused halfway to lips, and every eye turned to watch their response, but Nathan didn't miss a beat. You're absolutely right. I picked up Good to Great first, but Elise recommended The Art of War instead. Said if I really wanted to understand business strategy, I should start with Sun Tzu. Best advice I ever got. Elise looked at him with what she hoped appeared to be fond remembrance rather than amazed relief. You were so skeptical. Said military strategy had nothing to do with corporate leadership. And you spent 20 minutes proving me wrong, right there in the aisle, Nathan added, his hand finding hers on the table in what looked like an unconscious gesture of affection. I knew then that you were going to change my perspective on everything. 20 minutes? Mr. Lynn made a note in a small notebook he'd produced from his jacket pocket. That's quite a conversation for a chance meeting. When you find someone who challenges your assumptions, time tends to disappear, Elise said, and realized it was completely true, even if she was describing moments that had never actually happened. How thorough of you to check purchase records, Margaret said dryly, her tone suggesting that Ethan's investigation tactics were not entirely appreciated. I suppose next you'll be requesting to see their text message history. Ethan had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I'm just trying to understand the timeline, grandmother. This engagement came as such a surprise to everyone who knows Nathan. Sometimes the best things do come as surprises, Elise said firmly. Nathan and I wanted to keep our relationship private until we were sure it was serious. Neither of us enjoys being in the spotlight, and yet, here you are, engaged to one of America's most visible bachelors. Mr. Lynn observed, his pen poised over his notebook. Here I am, engaged to the man I love, Elise corrected, looking directly at Nathan. Everything else is just background noise. The look that passed between them was so genuine, so charged with real emotion, that even Mrs. Thornton sighed romantically. That's beautiful, dear, she said, pressing her hand to her heart. Charles and I met under similar circumstances, both of us trying to maintain our privacy while navigating a very public courtship. Sometimes you just know, don't you? You do, Nathan agreed, his thumb stroking across Elise's knuckles in a gesture so natural it seemed unconscious. Though I have to admit, I was intimidated at first. Elise is brilliant, accomplished, completely independent. I wasn't sure what she could possibly see in someone like me. Someone like you? Elise laughed. And it was completely natural. You mean someone who's built an empire from the ground up, graduated summa cum laude from Harvard, speaks 3 languages, and somehow still finds time to read philosophy for fun. Yeah. Real mystery why I'd be interested. You read philosophy? Mr. Langley asked Nathan with genuine surprise. Marcus Aurelius. Mostly. Nathan admitted. Stoicism helps with the stress of running a company. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. How wonderfully unexpected, Mrs. Langley clapped her hands together. A philosophical businessman and a crusading journalist. You two must have the most fascinating conversations. We do, Elise said, and realized it was completely true. Nathan challenges me to think differently about everything. He's not at all what I expected from a CEO. What did you expect? Margaret asked with obvious amusement, clearly enjoying watching her grandson be praised. Someone more. Traditionally corporate, focused primarily on profit margins and quarterly reports. Nathan thinks about the human impact of business decisions, which is surprisingly rare in his position. How diplomatic of you not to mention names, Ethan said with forced lightness, though his jaw had tightened slightly. How accurate of her to recognize quality leadership, Margaret corrected firmly. Nathan has always been more interested in building sustainable value than extracting maximum profit. It's why he'll make an excellent leader for the next generation. The comment hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Ethan's jaw tightened further, and Mr. Lynn scribbled more notes in his ever-present notebook. Speaking of leadership in the future, Ethan said, clearly changing tactics, I've been wondering about the financial implications of this engagement. Have you two discussed a prenuptial agreement? Ethan, Margaret's voice could have cut glass. That is entirely inappropriate dinner conversation. It's okay, Margaret, Elise said calmly, though her heart was racing. It's a fair question, even if the timing is questionable. Yes, we've discussed it. I insisted on one. Actually, this clearly wasn't the answer Ethan expected. You insisted on a prenup? I have my own career, my own assets, my own financial independence. The last thing I want is for anyone to think I'm marrying Nathan for his money. Elise's voice carried conviction that came from genuine belief. I fell in love with the man, not the bank account. How refreshing, Mrs. Thornton murmured approvingly. So many young women today seem to view marriage as a financial strategy rather than an emotional commitment. Very modern thinking, her husband agreed. Building a partnership based on mutual respect rather than economic dependency. But Mr. Lynn wasn't finished with his professional assessment. Ms. Harper, can you tell us about your relationship with Colin Ramsey? The question hit like a physical blow. Elise felt Nathan tense beside her, his hand tightening protectively around hers. The entire table seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her response. I'm not sure how my previous relationship is relevant to this conversation, Nathan said coldly, his voice carrying a warning that made several guests shift uncomfortably. It's relevant because Mr. Ramsey has been quite vocal about his opinions regarding this engagement. Mr. Lynn replied smoothly, completely unintimidated by Nathan's tone. He suggested that Miss Harper might be using this relationship to rehabilitate her reputation after their unpleasant breakup. Elise felt rage building in her chest like a gathering storm, but she forced herself to remain calm. Colin is entitled to his opinions. What he's not entitled to is spreading lies about my character or my motivations. So, you deny that this engagement is professionally motivated? I deny that my personal life is any of Colin's business, or frankly, yours. Elise's voice was steel wrapped in silk. Colin cheated on me with my best friend, publicly humiliated me, and tried to damage my career when I refused to take him back quietly. If you want to discuss someone's questionable motivations, perhaps we should start there. Elise, Nathan murmured, his voice full of admiration and support. No, it's fine. I'm tired of being polite about this. Elise turned to address the entire table, her journalist instincts taking over. Colin couldn't handle dating a woman who was more successful than him, so he tried to tear me down to his level. When that didn't work, he cheated. When I left him, he tried to destroy my reputation by questioning my ethics and spreading rumors about my sources. The idea that I would need to manufacture a relationship to rehabilitate myself from being the victim of infidelity is not just insulting. It's absurd. The table was completely silent. Even Mr. Lynn had stopped writing, his pen frozen over his notebook. Well said, Margaret declared firmly, raising her wine glass slightly. Any woman who would settle for less than she deserves deserves less than she settled for. Oscar Wilde? Nathan asked with a small smile, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Margaret Caldwell, his grandmother replied proudly. Though I'm sure Oscar would approve of the sentiment, the tension began to ease as conversation resumed. But Elise could feel Lynn's analytical gaze still fixed on her. She had the unsettling feeling that everything she'd said was being catalogued, processed, evaluated for authenticity. Every pause, every inflection, every micro-expression was being assessed by someone trained to detect deception. "Tell us about your family, dear Mrs." Langley said, clearly trying to steer the conversation to safer waters. "Are they excited about the engagement?" "My parents are thrilled," Elise replied. "Grateful for the change of subject. They're both teachers in Ohio. My father teaches high school history. My mother teaches elementary school. They raised me to value education, hard work, and treating people with respect, regardless of their economic status. How wonderfully grounding," Mrs. Thornton commented. "It's so important to remember one's roots, especially when entering a world of privilege. I think privilege comes with responsibility," Elise said honestly. "The more you have, the more you should give back to your community." "And how do you plan to do that as part of the Caldwell family?" Ethan asked, his tone suggesting this was more than idle curiosity. "I'd like to establish a foundation focused on media literacy and educational access. Too many people lack the tools to critically evaluate information, which makes them vulnerable to manipulation and misinformation." "Fascinating," Margaret said with obvious approval. "That aligns perfectly with the family's existing charitable interests." "I wasn't aware of specific family charitable interests," Mr. Lynn noted, making another entry in his notebook. "The Caldwell Foundation has been supporting education initiatives for over 50 years, Margaret replied coolly. "Perhaps you should have done more thorough research before accepting this assignment." The rebuke was subtle but unmistakable, and Mr. Lynn's cheeks colored slightly. Dessert arrived, individual chocolate soufflés that were works of art, accompanied by port that was probably older than Elise. The conversation shifted to safer topics: upcoming social events, vacation plans, the latest Broadway shows, art auctions, charity galas, but underneath the civilized veneer, Elise could feel the undercurrents of evaluation and judgment, as if she were a specimen being examined under a very expensive microscope. "These soufflés are incredible," she commented, taking a bite of what might have been the best dessert she'd ever tasted. "Cook trained in Paris," Margaret said proudly. "I believe in surrounding myself with excellence in all things, including future granddaughters-in-law?" "Mrs." Langley asked with a knowing smile. "Especially future granddaughters-in-law," Margaret replied, raising her port glass in Elise's direction. "Nathan," Ethan said as they finished dessert, setting down his spoon with deliberate precision, "could I speak with you privately for a moment? Business matter that requires immediate attention. Anything you need to say to Nathan, you can say in front of me," Elise said firmly, her journalist instincts flaring. "Actually, this concerns confidential company business board matters that require discretion." Nathan looked torn between protecting Elise and avoiding a scene in front of their guests. "It's okay," she said quietly, placing her hand over his. "I'll be fine. 5 minutes," Nathan told Ethan firmly, then leaned down to kiss Elise's temple in a gesture that felt completely natural. "I'll be right back." As the men left the dining room, Margaret immediately moved to sit beside Elise, her emerald silk rustling softly. "How are you holding up, dear?" "I feel like I'm being dissected by a very polite vulture," Elise admitted quietly. "Mr. Lynn is quite thorough. Ethan hired him to investigate potential corporate espionage last year. The man could probably tell you what everyone at this table had for breakfast and how much they paid for their shoes. That's not particularly reassuring." "It's not meant to be." Margaret's expression was grim. "Ethan is more desperate than I realized. Hiring a private investigator to spy on family members crosses a line. Even for him, what happens if he finds something, some inconsistency in our story, some proof that this isn't real?" Margaret was quiet for a moment, studying Elise's face with those sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "Can I ask you something, and will you give me an honest answer?" "Of course. Are you in love with my grandson?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Elise felt her carefully constructed defenses crumbling under Margaret's penetrating gaze. Around them, the other guests continued their polite conversation, but it felt like she and Margaret existed in a bubble of truth. She started, then stopped. "It's complicated. Love usually is. But that's not what I asked." Elise took a shaky breath. "We agreed this would be fake. A business arrangement. No romantic feelings. No complications. Just a mutually beneficial performance. And how's that working out for you? Elise laughed despite herself, the sound carrying more pain than humor. Terribly. Absolutely terribly. Good, Margaret said with obvious satisfaction. Because it's working out terribly for Nathan, too. I've watched him for the past week, and I haven't seen him this happy since before his parents died. You've given him something I never could, the freedom to be himself, instead of constantly living up to impossible expectations. But what if Ethan proves we're lying? What if he destroys Nathan's reputation, his inheritance? Ethan can go to heck, Margaret said with surprising vehemence, her refined facade cracking slightly. I've made my decision about the company's succession, and it has nothing to do with Nathan's personal life. It has everything to do with his character, his vision, and his ability to lead with both intelligence and compassion, all things that were true before you came along and will be true regardless of what happens between you two. Before Elise could respond, the men returned. Nathan looked frustrated and tense, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. Ethan looked smugly satisfied, like a cat who'd cornered a particularly interesting mouse. Mr. Lynn trailed behind them, still taking notes with the dedication of a court reporter. Everything all right? Margaret asked with deceptive mildness, though her eyes were sharp with concern. Fine, Ethan replied, smoothing his tie. Just discussing some upcoming board decisions and succession planning. Nathan sat back down beside Elise, his hand immediately finding hers under the table. His touch was warm but tense, and she could feel the frustration radiating from him like heat from a furnace. Well, Margaret announced, rising from her chair with regal grace, I think it's time we move to the library for after-dinner drinks. Winston has prepared a lovely selection of cognac and liqueurs that have been aging longer than some of our guests have been alive. As they filed out of the dining room, Mr. Lynn approached Elise directly for the first time all evening, his notebook tucked under his arm like a weapon. Ms. Harper, might I have a word? Nathan immediately stepped closer, protective instincts flaring. Anything you have to say can be said in front of me. It's all right, Elise said, though her heart was racing like she'd just run a marathon. What did you want to discuss, Mr. Lynn? I've completed my preliminary investigation into your relationship with Mr. Caldwell. Her voice was steadier than she felt. Mr. Lynn consulted his notebook, flipping through several pages covered in meticulous handwriting. Your story about meeting at the Strand checks out perfectly. The purchase records confirm Mr. Caldwell bought The Art of War on October 15th at 3:47 PSW. M. The receipt also shows he purchased a coffee from the in-store cafe at 3:52 p.m. Elise felt a moment of confusion that must have shown on her face. They'd made up that entire story. How could there be actual purchase records with such specific details? I also confirmed that you were indeed in the journalism section that afternoon, researching media ethics. The librarian on duty that day remembered you specifically because you spent several hours there and asked for help finding additional resources on digital media manipulation. The confusion deepened. Elise had been at the Strand that day. She remembered it clearly now that he mentioned it, but she had no memory of seeing Nathan there. No recollection of dropping a book or having any conversation about business strategy. Your subsequent dating history also appears completely authentic. Dinner reservations at Lombardi's under Mr. Caldwell's name for October 22nd. A charge to his credit card at the Brooklyn Bridge gift shop on November 12th. Presumably when you visited his favorite spot for your first kiss. Elise felt the world tilting around her, like she was standing on the deck of a ship in rough seas. Every detail of their carefully constructed fictional love story was being confirmed by real evidence. It was impossible unless, furthermore, Mr. Lynn continued, oblivious to her growing confusion, I spoke with several of your colleagues at the Tribune. They confirmed that you've been noticeably happier in recent months, though you've been very private about your personal life. One colleague mentioned that you'd started wearing a particular necklace regularly, the same necklace you're wearing tonight. Elise's hand flew to her throat, where a delicate silver chain held a small pendant her grandmother had given her years ago. She'd been wearing it almost daily since her grandmother's death, but somehow Mr. Lynn had woven it into their fictional narrative as evidence of their relationship. I also obtained your cell phone records, Mr. Lynn continued, and found a pattern of regular communication between you and Mr. Caldwell dating back 7 months. Text messages, phone calls, even some lengthy late-night conversations. This was impossible. Elise knew for certain that she'd never had Nathan's phone number before their arrangement began. She would have remembered texting with a billionaire CEO. The evidence overwhelmingly supports your claims of a genuine long-term relationship that you've kept private until recently. I found no indication of deception, financial motivation, or recent fabrication. Ethan looked like someone had just told him the earth was flat. That's impossible. There must be something you missed. I'm very thorough, Mr. Taxionhite. Caldwell. If there was deception to find, I would have found it. Mr. Lynn closed his notebook with finality. My professional opinion is that this engagement is entirely legitimate, but the timing, the suddenness, Ethan protested, his voice rising slightly. The timing suggests two people who value privacy, finally deciding to go public with their relationship. Nothing more, nothing less. Mr. Lynn tucked his notebook into his jacket pocket, perhaps triggered by external circumstances that made continued secrecy untenable. Margaret looked absolutely delighted, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Well, that settles that, doesn't it? But Elise was reeling, her mind racing with impossible possibilities. How could their fake story be supported by real evidence? Phone records that didn't exist? Restaurant reservations she'd never made? Nathan, she said quietly, can I talk to you alone? They excused themselves to a small sitting room off the library. Closing the door behind them, Elise turned to face Nathan, her mind spinning with questions that seemed to have no logical answers. The evidence, she said without preamble, the phone records, the restaurant reservations, the timeline. How is any of that possible? We made up that entire story. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, looking nervous for the first time all evening. About that, Nathan, what aren't you telling me? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at a painting on the wall as if it held the answers to the universe. I didn't make up that story. I mean, I embellished it, created dialogue that never happened, but the core of it was real. What do you mean? Elisa's voice was sharp, her journalist instincts flaring. Nathan turned to face her directly, his blue eyes serious. I was at the Strand that day, October 15th. I did see you in the journalism section, researching ethics. You dropped a book, All the President's Men, and I picked it up for you. Elisa's eyes widened as a vague memory surfaced, like something emerging from deep water. The man in the business section. That was me. We talked for maybe 5 minutes about Woodward and Bernstein, investigative journalism, the importance of holding powerful people accountable, and then you got a call from your editor and had to leave. But I couldn't forget you. You followed me? Her tone was a mix of disbelief and accusation. Not followed, but I may have kept track of you, your bylines, your articles, your career progression. I started reading everything you wrote. When you got engaged to Colin, I felt ridiculously disappointed. When that ended, I felt guilty for being relieved. Elise sank into a chair, processing this revelation. So, when I slapped you at the plaza, it wasn't the first time I'd seen you. It was just the first time I had an excuse to talk to you again. You manipulated this entire situation. No. Nathan knelt beside her chair, his hands covering hers. The slap was real. Your anger was real. Colin's humiliation was real. I just took advantage of an opportunity to protect you and get to know you at the same time. By lying to me, by not telling you the whole truth. There's a difference. Elise pulled her hands away, standing up to pace around the small room. But the phone records, the restaurant reservations, Mr. Lynn said there was evidence of communication going back months. Nathan looked uncomfortable. I may have created some of that evidence after we made our agreement, called your phone a few times when I knew you wouldn't answer, left voicemails that would show up in records, made restaurant reservations under both our names and then canceled them, created a paper trail that would support our story if anyone investigated. That's actually brilliant, Elise said despite herself, and completely manipulative. I was protecting us. Both of us. I knew Ethan would dig, and I wanted to make sure our story would hold up to scrutiny. But why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid you'd think exactly what you're thinking now, that I manipulated you into this situation. Elise stopped pacing, looking at him directly. Didn't you? Partially, yes, but not the way you think. Nathan stood as well, his voice urgent. Yes, I noticed you before we officially met. Yes, I was attracted to you before our arrangement began. Yes, I created evidence to support our cover story. But everything that's happened between us since then, the conversations, the laughter, the way you challenge me to be better, the way I feel when I'm with you, all of that is completely genuine. How do I know that? How do I know any of this is real and not just an extension of your manipulation? Because you know me now. Really know me. Nathan stepped closer, his voice passionate. You've seen past the public persona to who I actually am. You've met my family, seen my vulnerabilities, heard my fears. You've seen me at my worst and my best. Would someone who was just manipulating you reveal all of that? Elise considered this. He was right. The Nathan she'd come to care about over the past week wasn't the polished CEO from the Plaza Gala. He was complex, thoughtful, sometimes insecure, often funny, and completely different from what she'd expected. Those moments of vulnerability, of genuine connection, couldn't all have been calculated. The dinner reservations, the Brooklyn Bridge receipt, I may have recreated some of the dates I imagined taking you on, he admitted. When we were building our fake story, I used real places I'd actually wanted to go with you. Places I'd fantasized about taking you during those months when I was reading your articles and wondering what it would be like to know you. That's either incredibly romantic or incredibly creepy. I was hoping for romantic. Despite everything, Elise felt a smile tugging at her lips. You're insane. Completely. But I'm insane about you, Elise. I love you. The words hung in the air between them, simple and complicated all at once. I know it's fast. I know it's messy. I know we started this as a fake arrangement built on my manipulation and your professional desperation. But what I feel for you is the realest thing I've ever experienced. Elise felt her heart stop, then start again at double speed. You can't just say that. Why not? It's true. Because it changes everything. Good. I want to change everything. Nathan stepped closer, his hands framing her face gently. I want to rip up that contract and start over. I want to take you on real dates to real places. I want to introduce you to people as my girlfriend, not my fake fiancé. I want to fall asleep next to you and wake up with you and have completely inappropriate public displays of affection that make my grandmother roll her eyes. Elise felt tears building in her eyes. What if this doesn't work? What if we're too different? Or the media pressure destroys it? Or your family doesn't really accept me? Or what if it does work? What if we're perfect for each other and we're too scared to find out? A soft knock on the door interrupted them. Margaret's voice called out with perfect timing. Children, I hate to interrupt, but our guests are preparing to leave. They'd like to say goodbye. Nathan and Elise looked at each other, the weight of unfinished conversation hanging between them like a bridge half built. What do I tell them? Elise asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tell them whatever feels true. They returned to the library, where Ethan stood with barely concealed frustration while Mr. Lynn packed away his notebook with professional efficiency. The other guests were indeed preparing to leave, gathering purses and wraps, while making the kind of polite departure conversation that wealthy people had perfected over generations. Thank you for a lovely evening, Margaret, Mrs. Langley said warmly, embracing their hostess. And congratulations again to you both. What a wonderful couple you make. Thank you, Elise replied, accepting hugs and handshakes from the departing guests. It was wonderful meeting all of you. You must come to our charity luncheon next month, Mrs. Thornton insisted. I'd love to hear more about your foundation ideas. I'd be honored. Ethan approached them last, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes cold with frustration. Well played, he said quietly, his voice carrying undertones of grudging respect and barely concealed anger. I underestimated you both. This was never a game, Ethan. Nathan replied firmly, his arm sliding protectively around Elise's waist. Wasn't it? Ethan's smile was sharp enough to cut. But I suppose it doesn't matter now. You've won this round, Nathan. Enjoy your victory. Just remember, winning isn't the same as deserving. And what exactly haven't I deserved? Nathan asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Everything you've been handed your entire life. The company, the inheritance, Margaret's favoritism. You've never had to fight for anything. Never had to prove yourself the way the rest of us have. You think I haven't had to prove myself? Nathan's voice was incredulous. I've been under a microscope since I was 12 years old, expected to be perfect, to live up to impossible standards. Poor little rich boy, Ethan sneered. How terrible to inherit billions of dollars and the respect of the business world. That's enough. Margaret's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She'd been listening from the doorway, her expression colder than Elise had ever seen it. Ethan, you will leave my home now, and you will not return until you can speak to your family with respect. Family? Ethan laughed bitterly. Is that what we are? Because from where I stand, it looks like there's Nathan, your golden boy. And then there's everyone else fighting for scraps. You're right, Margaret said quietly, her voice carrying decades of authority. There is Nathan, who has spent the last 15 years working 18-hour days to honor his parents' memory and build on what they started. And then there's you, who has spent the same 15 years looking for shortcuts and feeling sorry for yourself. Ethan's face flushed red. You have no idea what I've sacrificed. You've sacrificed nothing but opportunities, Margaret interrupted. Every door I opened for you, you walked away from. Every chance I gave you to prove yourself, you squandered. Don't blame Nathan for your own choices. After Ethan left with Mr. Lin in tow, the mansion felt suddenly quiet, as if a storm had passed. Margaret, Nathan, and Elise stood alone in the library, surrounded by thousands of books and the weight of family history. Well, that was illuminating, Margaret said dryly, settling into her favorite chair with the grace of someone accustomed to managing crises. I assume you two have some things to discuss. We do, Nathan admitted. Good. Take your time. I'll be in my study if you need anything. Margaret paused at the door, looking back at them with something that might have been maternal affection. For what it's worth, I've never seen two people fight so hard against falling in love. It's been quite entertaining to watch. After she left, Nathan and Elise stood facing each other in the elegant library, surrounded by leather-bound volumes and the soft glow of table lamps. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they'd said and everything they hadn't. So, Elise said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, what happens now? Now, we decide whether to keep pretending this is fake or admit that it stopped being fake somewhere around the second day. When did you know it was real for you? Nathan considered the question seriously, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. The lighthouse. When you were talking about your fears and dreams, and I realized I wanted to know everything about you, not for the arrangement, not for the performance, but because I was falling for you, and I wanted to fall deeper. For me, it was this morning, when you brought me coffee and we spent 2 hours planning fictional dates, and I caught myself wishing they were real. They can be real, can they? Elise stepped closer to him, drawn by the honesty in his voice. Because I have to tell you something, too. What? I love you, too. The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them back all evening. I love how smart you are, how you listen when I talk, how you make me laugh even when I'm terrified. I love that you protected me from Colin, even though it meant creating this complicated charade. I love that you read philosophy and make terrible jokes about your furniture and care about using your wealth responsibly. Nathan's smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face. Yeah? Yeah. But I'm still angry that you didn't tell me about seeing me before, about creating evidence, about manipulating the situation. That's fair. I'll make it up to you. How? By taking you on the real version of every fake date we planned, starting with that Italian restaurant in Little Italy tonight. If you want, it's almost midnight. Then tomorrow, or next week, or whenever you're ready to let me court you properly. Elise laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. Court me? What? Are we living in a Jane Austen novel? If that's what it takes to convince you I'm serious about this, I'll write you sonnets and send flowers every day. Please don't. I'm allergic to most flowers. And your poetry is probably terrible. How do you know my poetry is terrible? You're a CEO. It's statistically likely. Nathan stepped closer, his hands finding her waist. Can I kiss you now? A real kiss, not a performance kiss. I thought you'd never ask. This time, when Nathan kissed her, there were no cameras, no audiences, no purpose beyond the simple desire to kiss the woman he loved. It was soft and sweet and full of promise. And when they broke apart, both of them were smiling like teenagers with their first crush. So, what happens to the contract? Elise asked, her arms still around his neck. We burn it ceremonially, with champagne and possibly fireworks. And your grandmother's succession plans? She'll do whatever she thinks is best for the company, but it won't be based on my personal life anymore. She made that clear tonight. And Ethan? Ethan will have to learn to live with disappointment again. I feel sorry for him. Why? Because he spent so much energy being angry about what he doesn't have that he's never learned to appreciate what he does have. Nathan studied her face in the lamplight. That's very generous of you, considering he just spent the evening trying to destroy our relationship, trying to destroy our fake relationship. He actually ended up proving our real one. True. Though I'm not sure that was his intention. They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, processing everything that had happened. Outside the library windows, the Hamptons stretched out under a canopy of stars. And somewhere in the distance, the lighthouse Nathan's great-great-grandfather had built continued its steady beacon. Can I ask you something? Elise said eventually. Anything. When we tell this story to people, the real story, how do we explain the part where I slapped you and then kissed you in the same night? Nathan grinned, pulling her closer. We tell them the truth. Sometimes love hits you like a slap in the face, and sometimes it sneaks up on you like a kiss in the moonlight. We just happen to get both in one evening. That's either very romantic or completely ridiculous. The best love stories usually are both. And what about the manipulation, the fake evidence, the elaborate charade. We tell them that sometimes the wrong reasons lead to the right results, that sometimes you have to take a detour to find where you're supposed to be. And if people think we're crazy, then we're crazy together. As they kissed again under the starlight streaming through the windows, neither of them noticed Margaret watching from the doorway with a satisfied smile. She'd been orchestrating this outcome from the moment she'd insisted on the 2-week stay, but she was pleased to see that her grandson and his brilliant, stubborn, perfect match had finally figured it out for themselves. Tomorrow, there would be contracts to dissolve, announcements to make, and a real relationship to navigate under the watchful eyes of the media and society. There would be challenges and complications and the normal difficulties of two successful, independent people learning to build a life together. But tonight, there was just Nathan and Elise, finally honest about their feelings, finally ready to stop pretending and start living the love story they'd accidentally written together. "One more thing," Nathan said as they finally separated, both breathless and grinning. "What?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For slapping me at the plaza. If you hadn't, we might never have found each other." "In that case, you're welcome. But let's agree that all future conflicts will be resolved with words. Not violence. Deal. Though I have to say, you have an excellent right hook. Years of self-defense classes, Lila insisted after I started covering political corruption stories. Remind me to send Lila a thank you note." "For what?" "For having a best friend who taught you to protect yourself. It led to the best thing that ever happened to me." And in the grand tradition of the best romantic comedies, they kissed again as the camera, metaphorically speaking, pulled back to show the beautiful mansion, the starlit ocean, and two people who had found love in the most unexpected place of all. In each other's arms, surrounded by the wreckage of their carefully laid plans and the promise of a future they were finally brave enough to want, everyone, it seemed, would live happily ever after, even if it took them a little while to figure out they'd